Many virtues are useful in life, but one in particular has always stood out to me, and that's dependability. We all know people we describe as dependable, trustworthy, or reliable. They're the people you instinctively turn to when something important needs to get done. But what is it that actually makes them dependable? Is it simply another personality trait, or is there something deeper that gives a person's word its weight? In this video, I'd like to present the framework I arrived at while thinking about the question. More importantly, I'd like to discuss why I think dependability is valuable, not only for the people around us, but perhaps even more so for ourselves. Let's start by investigating what it actually means to be dependable, and more importantly, how one becomes so. While writing this video and trying to define the aspects that make a person dependable, I realized that dependability is not an innate ability or a gift, but it's built. In the end, I think I challenged this idea a little bit, but we'll see down the line. Anyhow, initially, I was a little lost in my attempts to understand how reliability in a person develops, but looking back, I think I simply wasn't approaching the problem from the right angle. I kept analyzing individual traits, mixing them together, while trying to figure out the foundation upon which dependability is built. But rather than being supported by a collection of theoretical pillars, or for lack of a better word, lesser virtues, it started to resemble something else entirely. Dependability seemed less like a list of character traits and more like a process. Better yet, a flow. A process that, if completed successfully over and over again, eventually leads people to regard someone as dependable. Imagine what I'm about to describe as a flowchart. Every process has to begin somewhere. In this case, I believe it begins with prudence. Before making a promise, a dependable person first has to assess the situation and judge whether the commitment should be made in the first place. If they decide to give their word, commitment naturally flows. Having accepted the obligation, they must then be consistent in their actions to seek the task through. Finally, they must remain responsible and accountable for both the task itself and its eventual outcome. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed to capture a way dependable people operate, but I still felt like something was missing. The flowchart alone isn't enough in my opinion. A person could go through the whole flow in the service of dishonest or even immoral ends. The process explains how someone carries out their commitments, but it says nothing about the principles guiding those commitments. That's where honesty and integrity come in. At first, I couldn't figure out where those two belonged. I kept trying to fit them somewhere within the flowchart, but no matter where I placed them, something fell off. Then it clicked. They don't belong inside the process because they aren't another stage of it. They are the environment in which the entire process takes place. Imagine the flowchart enclosed within a box. Surrounding the box is a sea of honesty and integrity, let's say. Every decision, every promise, and every action takes place within that environment. They are the principles that give the process its moral direction, and ultimately determine whether the person being described is merely dependable or genuinely trustworthy. With that framework established, let's examine each stage of the process individually. Let's start with integrity and honesty, which, as I discussed previously, form the foundation of a trustworthy and dependable individual. Integrity is often broadly defined as doing the right thing, but what does it actually mean? The word integrity comes from the Latin integer, meaning whole or undivided. When, for example, somebody says a bridge has structural integrity, it doesn't mean that the structure has suddenly become moral. It simply means it isn't fractured. And the same idea applies to people. A person of integrity is not fractured internally. Their values, beliefs, and actions are coherent with one another. A dependable person carries out their commitments while remaining faithful to the principles, rather than abandoning them whenever something becomes inconvenient. Honesty flows naturally from integrity, and in my view, it's one of the clearest manifestations. When a person's words align with reality, they demonstrate that same internal coherence. Their speech reflects their beliefs, and their beliefs are expressed through their actions. In that sense, honesty is integrity made visible. And then we get into the actual flowchart. Prudence is where I think it all begins. Prudence is the ability of a dependable person to assess a task or potential promise and decide whether they should give their word in the first place. That is what transforms a person who simply yaps, logia to aera as we say in Greek, into someone whose promises are expected to be delivered. Being able to judge what one ought to do in a particular situation is an invaluable attribute. It prevents a person from overpromising by teaching them to weigh their commitments carefully. This connects well with the concept of phronesis, which is discussed extensively by Aristotle and commonly translated as practical wisdom. Phronesis is the ability to apply moral principles and experience to make sound judgments about how to act in real-world situations. While prudence, as I use it here, is not synonymous with Aristotle's broader concept of phronesis, the connection is clear. A prudent person exercises practical judgment before taking responsibility for a task. On the other hand, there are those who fail to be prudent. To be honest, it is almost impossible for any of us to exercise perfect judgment all the time. We all have lapses in judgment. Some of us, yes, I include myself here, are simply more prone to them than others. With that said, I think there are two common ways in which people fail to exercise prudence. The first is the optimist. This is the person who genuinely believes they will be able to follow through when they they agree to help a friend move, for example. Somewhere along the way, however, poor planning or time management prevents them from fulfilling that commitment. The second type is the people pleaser. They promise more than they can realistically deliver because they struggle to reject someone. Why some people find it so difficult to say no is a separate discussion, perhaps one related to disagreeableness, and one I'm not yet prepared to explore in detail. The fact remains that some people agree to commitments they already suspect they cannot fulfill, simply to avoid disappointing the person asking. In my view, this is far more damaging to oneself than the first type of failure. Knowing in advance that you're unlikely to deliver creates a cascade of negative emotions, dread, guilt, and at times, toxic self-loathing. Eventually, those feelings are reinforced when reality confirms what you already feared by disappointing the very person you were trying not to let down. Therefore, prudence is as important for the self as it is important for the people around us. The second step in the process, as I've come to understand it, is commitment. Once a promise has been made, the dependable person is now obliged to make good on it. I don't use the word obliged negatively here. The obligation is entirely self-imposed. Through the exercise of prudence, the individual has already judged that the commitment is realistic and worth making. Having given their word of their own free will, the promise is no longer simply an intention, it becomes an obligation. The future self is already bound by an agreement by the will of the past. This is also why prudence comes first in my framework. Every meaningful commitment carries a cost. It may require time, energy, resources, or the opportunity to pursue something else entirely. Since our capacity to commit is limited, every promise inevitably excludes another. Combined with prudence, commitment is what makes those sacrifices deliberate rather than impulsive. I use the word sacrifice rather loosely here. Most commitments don't feel burdensome because they were accepted consciously and willingly. Like I said previously, this is the will of the past. A dependable person doesn't drag their feet simply because they have to honor a promise they chose to make. The sacrifice lies not in the suffering through the task, but in accepting that every commitment consumes something finite. If we imagine commitment as something that exists over time, rather than a single event, then consistency is simply the stability of the commitment. Anyone can be committed for a day or two. Consistency is the ability to maintain that commitment despite the passage of time, changing emotions, and changing circumstances. To me, consistency is the repeated ability to follow through on one's commitments to the standard that others have come to expect. It is what transforms a single fulfilled promise into a reputation. Anyone can deliver once. Dependable people do it repeatedly. George Russell. When it comes to interpersonal relationships, consistency is often reflected in the expected outcome of a person's work or the agreements they make. Take university, for example. I'm sure I'm not alone on this one. We've all been paired up with absolute tomato cans in group projects. Project mates who postpone their part until the very last few hours before the deadline, only to send you a steaming hot pile of doo-doo that you now have to spend your own time fixing. It makes your cortisol spike to levels previously thought impossible. On the other hand, someone who approaches their academic work consistently is likely to bring the same attitude into the group project. Everybody knows what level of work to expect, deadlines become less stressful, and the entire group benefits from it. Their consistency becomes everybody else's peace of mind. The same principle applies in the workplace. Employers highly value consistency because predictable performance makes planning and cooperation much easier. Even in competitive gaming, consistency is what often separates a good teammate from a mediocre one. Another more subtle aspect of consistency is punctuality. Being punctual is often regarded as a characteristic of a reliable person, and admittedly, that's one of the things I struggle with. My timings aren't great at all. It has become a running joke among the people close to me, and they're often surprised when I actually arrive on time. It took me quite a while to realize that being late isn't simply a harmless habit, it slowly chips away at the confidence people have in your word. If you repeatedly fail to arrive when you said you would, people naturally begin to wonder whether you follow through on other commitments as well. It's one of the things about myself that I'm actively trying to improve. In fact, I even made it my New Year's resolution to be on time at least 70% of the time, boosting my reliability index, so to speak. In the end, one thing is clear. People who can consistently perform their task to the desired outcome are genuinely regarded as dependable people, meaning consistency is what allows dependability to be recognized. The two final steps of responsibility and accountability I put together. I grouped these two together because they both revolve around the same idea: ownership. Responsibility is the ownership of the task itself. Accountability is the ownership of the outcome. The first begins the moment a commitment is accepted, while the second reveals itself once the work is done. These two go hand in hand because they represent what I would call all the practical aspect of dependability. The essence of these two virtues lies in ownership, and practicality seems to emerge from that almost intuitively. Perhaps what I'm trying to describe as practicality is really the point where the process leaves the mind and meets the outside world. Prudence, commitment, and even consistency are largely internal decisions, expressed through action. Responsibility and accountability are where these actions become exposed to reality. Other people now experience the consequences of your work, whether good or bad, and you're expected to stand behind it. And that's why those two truly matter to me. When criticism comes, an accountable and responsible person doesn't instinctively search for an excuse or someone else to blame. They accept ownership of the outcome, take the criticism on the chin, and adjust accordingly. That willingness to stand behind both success and failure is, in my opinion, one of the clearest signs of a dependable person. Now that I have presented my idea of dependability, I would like to discuss the impact I think it has on someone's life. Firstly, let's talk about the interaction with the outside world, as this is the first sign somebody will receive as they grow into a dependable person. The phrase "all reliable" comes to mind, especially that one SpongeBob meme. All reliable literally refers to that one thing that always works, that one thing that you can always depend on. Being that, but as a person, makes you a highly valuable member of any group, whether that be your family, your friend group, or your workplace. Being the person that others naturally turn to in difficult situations often comes with additional character traits, resilience being one of them. It takes mental fortitude to be dependable because many times you willingly choose to carry burdens that nobody forced you to take on. Another consequence of dependability is confidence, both the confidence other people have in you and the confidence you develop in yourself. This might be obvious, but as obvious as it is an incredibly valuable reputation to have, and one that is surprisingly difficult to earn. Let's again begin with the external, the confidence other people have in your ability to fulfill your promises. As you become more dependable, you will notice that the level of trust people place in you becomes almost proportional to your reliability, hence the close relationship with trustworthiness. And that's exactly why I chose to encapsulate the entire process within honesty and integrity. Trustworthiness is built upon those values. The value your word carries is tied directly to your ability to keep it. Trustworthiness, credibility, and whatever other synonym is used to describe this quality in an individual all stem from honesty and integrity. Dependable people are the base of this society and the reason our world functions. The external confidence then slowly translates into something internal. A dependable person, through repeated success, develops confidence in their own ability to follow through. This level of confidence in one's ability creates a positive affirmation effect that leads to more security and groundedness. The external factors are merely a confirmation of what the dependable person already knows. I myself am far from a dependable person. Sometimes I'll fail at prudence and accept something that later turns out I simply can't fit into my schedule. Other times I'll fall short on the responsibility or accountability part, finding excuses for work that could have been better. And that's okay. Dependability, at least as I see it, is a process of self-improvement. It is about becoming more committed and more honest with oneself and others, gradually learning both how to manage your time and where the limits of your abilities lie. We won't always assess ourselves accurately, whether because of pride or simply the fear of letting others down. One personal example I try to follow closely is my dad. He's someone who carefully weighs his promises at what I described as the prudence stage and isn't afraid to say no when necessary, which is still a skill I'm trying to develop. Of course, he won't always deliver perfectly. No human being can. Life happens. External circumstances sometimes get in the way. But one thing I admire is that he takes complete accountability for the outcome. To me, that is what living with integrity looks like. Following your principles, standing behind your word, and taking ownership of the consequences, whether they're good or bad. In conclusion, I think the purpose of this video was less to create some sort of self-help guide and more to organize my thoughts about people I've come to regard as dependable. I tried to identify the traits and, more importantly, the pattern that seemed to make up the kind of person. Whether I got the pattern right, I'm honestly not sure, but it is the framework I arrived at. The funny thing is that while I sat here trying to construct this whole process of prudence, commitment, consistency, and accountability, a lot of dependable people I've met probably never consciously thought about any of this. They simply live that way, almost instinctively. That realization raised another question for me. If some people seem to be dependable so naturally, is dependability something we're born with, or is it something we build? Personally, I don't think the answer is entirely one or the other. My intuition is that some people are born with a stronger inclination towards the type of character. Maybe they naturally find it easier to keep promises, to stay organized, or take responsibility. But I don't think that means the rest of us are excluded from becoming becoming more dependable. If anything, I think it's a character trait that can be cultivated consciously, even if it doesn't come naturally at first. Now, I'm probably stepping into waters that deserve an entirely separate discussion, so I'll leave it there. I'd genuinely be interested to hear what you guys think. Do you believe dependability is something we're born with, something we build, or perhaps a combination of both? Let me know in the comments. Well, that's about all I had to say on the topic. As always, thank you for taking the time to listen to me ramble for the past 15 or 20 minutes. If you have any of your own thoughts on whether dependability is built, innate, or if you think my whole framework is flawed, I would genuinely love to read them. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, consider leaving a like or subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next one.